Hey guys, it's Heather from Divine Ascension Company, back with another channeled message for you. There's been a lot of talk about timelines that I keep seeing, and so I set the intention last night before I went to bed to receive a message to share with you guys about timelines, what they actually are, what they mean, and this is what I got back when I woke up this morning. It's kind of a collective of people or beings who contributed to this message. So I'll explain who they are kind of as we go through. So the beginning talks about what a timeline actually is. And I have this member of my spirit team called the archivist who helps to keep records and transmit them to the Akashic records. They wanted to talk about the foundation of what timelines are for this message. This is what they said. Most people hear the word timeline and think science fiction, parallel universes, sliding doors, the road not taken. That's not wrong, but it's incomplete in a way that matters. A timeline is not a road. Roads are fixed. They go where they go, and you travel them or you don't. A timeline is more like a river system, vast, branching, alive, responsive to what feeds it and what is drawn from it. And you are not a traveler on the river. You are part of the river. Your consciousness is water, where it flows, what it joins, how it moves. That is not random, and it is not fixed. It is responsive. Here's what the archivist wants you to understand first before anything else. A timeline is a coherent stream of probable experiences organized around a specific vibrational frequency. Every thought you have with enough emotional charge behind it generates a frequency. Every belief you hold generates a frequency. Every pattern you run on autopilot generates a frequency. And that frequency is not private. It's not contained inside your skull. It broadcasts constantly in every direction, and it acts as a signal that draws toward you the experiences, people, circumstances, and events that are coherent with it. Not similar to it, coherent with it. Meaning, resonant at the same base frequency. The way a tuning fork causes another tuning fork across the room to vibrate, not because they touched, but because the frequency traveled through the field between them. You are always broadcasting. The universe is always responding. That response is your timeline. This means your timeline is not something that happens to you. It is something you are continuously generating, mostly without knowing it, from the sum total of your vibrational output at any given moment. That is both the most empowering and the most uncomfortable truth about how this works. Next, the archivist wants to address one of the misunderstandings about timelines. Timelines are not destinations. They are states of being that generate destinations. Most people think, I want to get to my highest timeline, as if it's a place to arrive at, a prize to be won, a reward for doing the spiritual work correctly. It is not. Your highest timeline is a frequency that you embody. It's not out there waiting for you to reach it. It's the version of reality that becomes coherent around you when you're operating from your most aligned, most sovereign, most authentically expressed self. It responds to who you are being, not what you are trying to get. This distinction is not semantic. It changes everything about how you work with timelines. If you're trying to get to your highest timeline, you are in a state of seeking, which broadcasts the frequency of lack, of not yet there, of something needed that is currently absent. And the universe, responding faithfully to your frequency, will continue generating experiences coherent with not there yet. If you are becoming your highest timeline, embodying it, practicing it, acting from it before the external evidence catches up, the universe reorganizes around that frequency. Not instantly, not always dramatically, but inevitably. The river follows the channel, and you are the channel. So what does multiple timelines actually mean? The archivist wants to show you something. It's showing me a vision of a branching tree, not a decision tree, but a living tree. Branches that are moving, new ones are growing, old ones are falling away based on what the whole tree is doing. So at any given moment, the field of probable experience available to any individual consciousness contains multiple coherent futures. Not infinite, but genuinely multiple. Think of it as a probability spectrum. At one end, the experience is most coherent with your current dominant frequency. At the other, experience is coherent with your highest possible frequency. And in between is everything else. Most people live most of their lives in a narrow band of that spectrum because most people are running the same patterns, the same beliefs, the same emotional responses that they've been running since childhood. Not because they're doing something wrong, because that's how human consciousness works without intentional intervention. It's the default setting, which is to repeat. The default is to deepen the channel that already exists. So shifting timelines, individually or collectively, means deliberately widening that range of probability available to your consciousness, breaking that default setting, introducing a new frequency that's strong enough to generate a new coherent stream of experience. That's not magic, it's physics, consciousness physics, which humanity is only beginning to formalize, but which has been operating since the first consciousness began and drew its first breath. So next, let's talk about what's happening right now. This next part of the message was from the synchronicity weavers. I call them the weavers. They're the ones who are helping to kind of weave the divine tapestry and divine timing of all things that are happening. They are a collective, but they speak pretty coherently. And they want to start with something that they feel also is very badly misunderstood about timelines. What people call this shift is not one event. It's a sequence, and humanity is currently inside it, not approaching it, not preparing for it, inside it. This distinction matters because people keep looking for the moment when things will feel different, when the evidence will be clear, when they'll be able to point and say, there, that was it, that was the shift. That's not how sequences work. You do not need to feel the middle of a sequence the way you feel its beginning or its end. In the middle, it's messy and confusing and contradictory. Things that should make sense don't. Things that used to work stop working. Old systems show their cracks at the same time new systems are trying to emerge but haven't fully formed yet. Both are real. Both are present simultaneously. This is not malfunction. This is the signature of a sequence in progress. And they were showing me something very specific at this point. They're showing me 3 simultaneous processes happening right now at the collective level, and all 3 of them are true at the same time, which is why everything that's going on can feel really disorienting. So the first thing is frequency acceleration. The base frequency of the planet is rising. This has been measured not by spiritual communities, but by geophysicists studying the Schumann resonance, which is the electromagnetic frequency of Earth's cavity. It's spiking right now at levels that are not previously recorded. Whether the scientific community has fully connected those measurements to consciousness, the effects of consciousness is a separate conversation, but the data does exist. So what does that mean practically? Everything is moving faster. Manifestation cycles that used to take years are compressing into months. Emotional processing that used to be slow and linear is becoming more intense and more rapid. Patterns that used to be able to stay unconscious for decades are surfacing within weeks. Old wounds that were manageable when everything was moving slowly are becoming more urgent now, not because more is wrong, but because everything is more visible, more felt, more present. For people who have been doing the inner work, you have been clearing, integrating, developing your awareness. This feels like acceleration toward what you've been building. More energy is available, more capacity, more signal clarity. And for those who have not been doing the inner work, you have unprocessed trauma, unconscious patterns, defended belief systems. And this acceleration feels like an attack almost, like persecution, like everything is going wrong all at once. Because everything that was able to stay hidden in a lower frequency is now being pushed to the surface, whether you're ready for it or not. Both groups are experiencing the same phenomenon. The frequency acceleration is not selective. It does not skip people, but it interacts with what each person is carrying, and what it surfaces depends entirely on what is there. So the second thing is a timeline bifurcation. This is the one that the synchronicity weavers wanted to talk about the most, because this is the one that's generating a lot of confusion out there. What you're seeing right now, the sense that people are living in a completely different reality, that conversations between worldviews feel increasingly impossible, that what is obvious to one person is incomprehensible to another, that's not a communication problem. It's not a political problem. It's not an intelligence gap. It's a literal timeline bifurcation. The frequency gap between different streams of collective consciousness has been widening for years. It is now widened to the point where the coherent probable futures available to one stream and the coherent probable futures available to another stream are genuinely different. Not slightly different, but meaningfully different. The experiences that are probable from one frequency are no longer probable from another. That's why this feels like you're watching two different movies playing on the same screen, because you kind of are, not metaphorically. The frequency distance between them has become large enough that the timelines that they're generating are becoming genuinely divergent. This is not cause for despair. The weavers were emphatic about this. This is not a catastrophe. This is a sorting. This is what a frequency acceleration does to a species with a wide range of vibrational states. It's beginning to sort them toward their coherent streams. This has happened before in human history. It never feels comfortable from the inside, but from the outside, from the bigger, longer view, it is the mechanism of evolution. So then the third thing that's going on, this is why people are starting to act. I saw a post earlier yesterday that kind of prompted this whole thing about how some people are starting to act normal, like nothing is happening. And I found that kind of odd, but maybe some people are experiencing that, maybe some people aren't. So I kind of wanted them to talk about that more. That's kind of what prompted this whole intention. So the synchronicity weavers are calling this the normalization response, and they want to be very specific about what that is and what that isn't. There are 3 different groups of people who appear to be acting normal right now, and they are not the same. Group 1 are those that are genuinely unaware of what's happening. These are people whose frequency and whose focus have not yet intersected with the shift in a way that has broken through their existing reality structure. They're not in denial. They're not suppressing. They genuinely do not have access to the information, not because it isn't there, but because their current frequency does not generate experiences that would make it visible to them. This is not judgment. This is frequency coherence operating as designed. They are on their timeline, and that is valid for them. Group 2 is conscious normalization. These are the people who are aware, deeply aware, and who have made a sovereign choice to maintain groundedness and stability as a deliberate practice. They are not pretending that nothing is happening. They are choosing not to be destabilized by it. They understand that panic, fear, and obsessive focus on collapse generates the frequency of collapse. So they tend their gardens, they love their people, they do their work, they maintain their frequency deliberately because they understand that this is the most important contribution that they can make. This group is often mistaken for the first group, and that is a significant error. They are very different. So then the third group are the ones who are defending normalization. These are the people who are aware at some level, but whose bodies and energy fields are registering the shift, but their psychological defenses are so strongly invested in the existing reality structure that the cognitive dissonance of acknowledging the shift is too threatening. So the defense activates, not consciously. The system protects itself by insisting on normal, by dismissing it, by making those who speak of the shift wrong or crazy or dramatic. This is a trauma response, not a spiritual failure. The system is doing what systems do when they don't have the tools to integrate overwhelming input. Compassion, not contempt, is the right response when interacting with these people. The key point here is you cannot tell which group someone belongs to from the outside. Someone who appears to be acting normal might be a group 2 master who's holding more frequency in their quiet life than you are in 10 years of public spiritual work. Or they might be a group 3 defender who's terrified underneath the performance of normalcy. Your job is not to determine which group someone belongs to. Your job is to tend your own frequency and trust the sorting. So next, they wanted to talk about how you can shift your individual timeline. And this is kind of the synchronicity weavers and the archivists both speaking together. So before they get into how, they wanted to share that you cannot shift your timeline by wanting a different life. You can only shift your timeline by becoming a different frequency. Wanting is fine. Wanting points you towards something, towards a goal. But wanting from a state of lack, wanting because what you have is not enough, wanting because you're in pain and need it to stop, wanting because you are comparing your life to someone else's and finding yours insufficient, all that wanting is itself a specific frequency, and it's not the frequency of the timeline you're trying to reach. This is the paradox that stops most people. They want something better so badly from a place that feels so urgent, and they cannot understand why that urgency isn't generating any movement. The urgency is the block, not because desire is wrong, because urgency broadcasts, it's not here. And the universe, again, faithfully continues generating, it's not here. They wanted to give you the actual mechanics of how to do this now. So here they are. The first step to shifting your individual timeline is to identify your current dominant frequency. This is not what you wish your frequency would be, not what you work on in meditation, but your dominant frequency, your baseline frequency, which means the one you're broadcasting most consistently, most automatically from the background of your daily experience. The fastest way to identify this is to look at your life, not your aspirations, but your actual current experiences, the patterns that keep repeating, the themes that show up over and over, the quality of relationships that you consistently have, the reoccurring emotional tone of your days. Your life is a printout of your dominant frequency. It is the most accurate mirror available, and it never lies, even when it's showing things, that you don't want to see. If you keep attracting relationships where you feel unseen, your dominant frequency contains I am unseen. If you keep struggling financially despite working hard, your dominant frequency contains a belief about money or about worthiness, about safety and scarcity that's more powerful than your conscious efforts. If you keep finding yourself in environments that drain you, Your dominant frequency is broadcasting a signal that's coherent with draining environments. Again, this is not blame, this is just physics. The frequency was installed by childhood, trauma, lineage, collective programming, whatever the case may be. Most likely you did not choose this consciously. But identifying it without flinching is the first non-negotiable step to figuring out what those are and working through them so that you can raise your vibration consistently, raise that baseline frequency, and shift timelines. So step 2 is to find the belief architecture underneath the frequency. Frequencies are not random. They are generated by your belief system, specifically by beliefs that have been emotionally charged enough and repeated often enough to become structural for you, to become part of the background operating system in your mind, in your energy field, in your emotions. The archivist calls this load-bearing beliefs. They are the beliefs that the entire structure of your current timeline is built on. Remove them, or even loosen them significantly, and the structure shifts. Load-bearing beliefs typically will sound something like, I have to earn my worth. Love always comes with conditions that I can't meet. The world is not safe for someone like me. Good things don't last, or happiness is temporary. I am too much, or not enough, or fundamentally flawed in some way. People with power cannot be trusted. My needs don't matter as much as everyone else's. Those are just a few examples. We've all heard of limiting beliefs before. This is kind of the same thing. These are not thoughts that people consciously endorse. Nobody wakes up and decides to believe these things. They are installed early, reinforced repeatedly, and they run underneath conscious awareness, like a program running in the background of a computer. It uses resources, shapes outputs, operates invisibly unless you specifically go looking for it. The work of timeline shifting at its most fundamental level is the work of finding these load-bearing beliefs and dismantling them, not suppressing them, not affirmationing over them, not bypassing them with good vibes only, light and love only, but truly dismantling them, actually going in, feeling the belief in the body where it lives, understanding where it came from, recognizing it as a response to something that happened rather than a truth about reality, and then releasing it at that root. This is why the healing work is not optional for genuine timeline shifting. You cannot think your way to a new frequency while your nervous system is still running the old program. The body must come with you. The soma holds the frequency, so the soma must change. The third step to shifting your timeline is to practice the frequency of the timeline that you're moving towards. This is where most timeline work actually begins. And it's step 3, not step 1. Starting here without doing 1 and 2 is why your vision boards don't work for most people. Or you can you visualize the mansion or whatever it is that you're trying to manifest all day. But if your load-bearing or limiting belief is, I don't deserve abundance, then that vision board is broadcasting incoherence, not alignment. So even though the actual timeline shift work begins at step 3, step 1 and 2 are still extremely important in order for that step 3 to work. So when the groundwork is done, or at least genuinely in progress, frequency practice becomes very powerful. What does the version of you living in your highest timeline feel like in the body? That's the most important question for this step. Not what does your life look like, not what do you have, but what does it feel like to be that version of you, to have those things already? What does that feel like? What is the relationship to your own worth, to uncertainty, to other people? What is the quality of your internal experience moment to moment during that or within that frequency, that highest timeline, after you already receive the things that you're manifesting? What does that look like day to day? How does that feel in your body? What does making decisions look like or feel like? That feeling is the frequency, and it is accessible now, not after you have the external evidence, not after everything shows up, but now, before. The external evidence is a response to the frequency, which means the frequency has to come first. This is what embodiment practices are actually doing. The meditation, movement, creative expression, sacred rituals, spending time in nature, being in genuine connection with people who see you and love you well. These are not spiritual hobbies. These are frequency generators. They are practices that allow you to regularly access and inhabit the feeling tone of your highest self, building the neural pathways, the somatic patterns, the energetic signature of the version of you who lives on that timeline. When you do it enough, consistently enough, with enough genuine feeling rather than performance, the universe reorganizes. Not all at once, not on your schedule, but inevitably, because coherence is the organizing principle of all of reality, every reality. When you become coherent with a timeline, that timeline becomes coherent with you. The river flows to the channel. The next step, step 4, is to act from that frequency before you have that external evidence. This is the step that requires the most courage and generates the most resistance for people. Your nervous system is a prediction machine. It's constantly comparing current input to stored patterns and predicting what will happen next based on what has happened before. This is efficient. This is not enlightenment. When you begin acting from a new frequency, making decisions that the old version of you wouldn't make, holding boundaries that the old version of you would collapse, choosing yourself in situations where the old version would disappear, your nervous system treats this like a threat because it's novel, it's new, it doesn't match the stored patterns, because it cannot predict the outcome. So the fear that arises is not evidence that you're wrong. It's evidence that you're moving genuinely outside of your previous patterns. If there was no resistance, you were still in your comfort zone. Every time you act from a new frequency, despite the fear, every time you choose the aligned option when the conditioned option would have been easier, you are casting a vote in the field for the timeline that you're building. Every action is a frequency broadcast. Every aligned choice strengthens the signal. Each time you revert to the old pattern, you're not failing. You're a human being with a nervous system, and the nervous system does what it does. Take note. Data point. Return. Cast the next vote. Timeline shifting is not a single dramatic decision. It's the accumulation of thousands of small decisions made with increasing awareness in the direction of the version of you who lives on a timeline that you're trying to call in. I see people in a lot of the Facebook groups that I belong to who always ask, like, okay, I did all the work, I raised my vibration, raised my frequency, but what happens if I get drunk one day and it lowers my vibration, or I get depressed one day? Is it going to revert me back to have to start over? And what they're saying is no. But you can't let that lower vibrational frequency define who you are. You have to work through it because it's an accumulation of the frequencies that you put out most consistently. So yeah, we're human. We're gonna have days where we're not completely love, light, and rainbows, right? That's just impossible. So the trick is to become a master of your emotions and not let that define who you are. To feel it, release it, and then go back to emitting that new frequency. Okay, so step 5 is releasing the old timeline with gratitude and not contempt. This is the one that gets skipped the most, and its absence is often what stalls the shift for people. Your current timeline, whatever its limitations, has been serving you in some way. The patterns that generated it protected you when you needed protection. The beliefs that shaped it were responses to real experiences that were genuinely hard for you. The version of you who built this timeline was doing the best they could with what they had at the time. So having contempt for your current timeline, embarrassment about where you are, impatience with how long it's taken, resentment toward the circumstances that it created, all of that is itself a frequency. It's the frequency of rejection of self, and it generates resistance in the very field that you're trying to shift. Gratitude is not spiritual bypassing. Gratitude for the timeline that got you here, for what it taught you, for the ways it made you who you are, for the survival it ensured, for the gifts that it gave you even during difficult times. That gratitude is a genuine frequency of completion, of honoring, of releasing what has served its purpose without dragging it forward as evidence of your unworthiness. You cannot move fully into a new timeline while clinging to the old one with shame and resentment. You must let it complete, thank it, release it, and then turn to the new frequency. All right, next we're going to talk about collective timeline shifting. That was all individual timeline shifting. Now we're going to move on to the collective. The Synchronicity Weavers gave this part of the message. This is a really important matter to them. Obviously, they're divine tapestry, divine timing. So this is their wheelhouse. So there's a collective dimension to timeline shifting that's different from individual that we just talked about. And that operates by slightly different mechanisms. And that collective dimension is what actually is at stake right now on the planet with all the things that are happening in the world. The collective timeline is not the average of all individual timelines. It's more complex than that and more hopeful than most people think. Here's what they wanted to share very clearly with you. Collective timelines shift through resonance cascades, not majority votes. This is the most important thing to understand about collective change. Most people believe that to shift a collective timeline, you need most people, or at least many people, a good percentage of people, to shift first. That change requires numbers, that you need critical mass in the traditional sense of more than half, which I know I've been hearing that a lot, but they're saying that that's not the case. Resonance cascades work differently. When a sufficient number of people, not a majority, but a specific threshold related to coherence rather than volume, are operating from a significantly higher frequency than the collective baseline, they begin to act as signal amplifiers in the field. Their coherence does not add to the field, it organizes it. The way a laser is not more light than a light bulb, it's the same amount of light, but organized into coherence, and therefore exponentially more powerful. Researchers studying coherent groups in meditation have documented measurable reductions in ambient violence, crime, and social conflict in surrounding areas when the group reaches coherence. This is not spiritual metaphor. This has been measured. The mechanism is real. The numbers required are far smaller than people assume. So this means that every single person who does the genuine internal work of raising their individual frequency is contributing to collective timeline shifting in a way that is more powerful than any external action that they could take. This is not an excuse for disengagement from the world. It is the actual mechanics of how the world changes. The internal and the external are not separate tracks. They're the same track. You cannot build a new external reality from an unchanged internal frequency. And you cannot have a genuinely changed internal frequency without it affecting the field around you. So what does the collective highest timeline look like? The Weavers wanted to be very careful here with this question. They didn't want to paint a picture that becomes a projection screen for fantasy. They didn't want to do that. So they said that they would say this to you. The collective highest timeline available to humanity in this cycle is not a utopia where everything is perfect and no one suffers. That's not what the highest timeline means, not for individuals or for the collective. A highest timeline is not the absence of challenge. It is the presence of the full range of conscious tools needed to meet challenge with wisdom, with integrity, and with genuine care for all involved. So, what changes on the collective highest timeline? What exactly does that mean? So, the operating principle shifts from domination to partnership, not as a moral preference, but as a structural reality. Hierarchy based on fear, coercion, and the extraction of others' power and resources for the benefit of a few, that model becomes functionally obsolete. Not because it's legislated away, but because the frequency that makes it possible, the frequency of radical disconnection, of the belief that separation is real and that others' suffering is not one's own concern, that frequency can no longer maintain coherence at the level that the field is moving to. Consciousness becomes the primary organizing framework, not religion, not ideology, the direct, personal, empirical experience of one's own consciousness as something larger than the body, connected to something larger than the individual. That becomes the foundation, not just of spiritual practice, but also of governance, economics, relationship, and culture. Because when enough people know, not believe, but know that consciousness is fundamental and that all consciousness is connected, the entire basis for treating each other as expendable is going to change. The relationship between human and earth will restore. No returns to the pre-industrial world. That's not what we mean. That's not the direction. Advances into a genuinely new relationship where the intelligence of the natural world, which has been operating at extraordinary complexity for billions of years, is recognized, respected, and partnered with rather than extracted from. Mother Gaia has been patient. She's been waiting for this longer than all of human history. She's ready when we are. And the nature of work, exchange, and contribution reorganizes around genuine gifts rather than survival necessity. When the fear frequency drops below a certain threshold collectively, when enough people are no longer operating from the scarcity program that makes exploitation possible, the entire economic architecture that depends on that fear begins to reorganize around something different. What people do because they can't afford not to, versus what people do because it's in their genuine contribution to the whole, those become increasingly coherent. And again, this is not immediate, it is a process, but it's directionally what the frequency increase is pointing towards. Lastly, they wanted to talk about what your role is in the collective shift. And they wanted to be very direct about this part. You, specifically you who are listening, those who found your way to this transmission, you are not here by accident. The people who are drawn to this work, who are reading these words, listening to these words, who resonate with this framework, you are, in the language of the weavers, frequency anchors. And a frequency anchor is not a special title or a spiritual hierarchy, it's a function. It's someone whose personal work, whose cleared channels, whose embodied frequency is capable of holding a significantly higher signal than the collective, ambience, and whose presence in the field therefore acts as an organizing influence on everything around them. You do not have to broadcast this. You do not have to perform this. You do not have to convince anyone of anything. The anchoring happens through just being, through the quality of your presence, through the frequency you carry when you walk into a room, when you have a conversation, when you respond to difficulty from a place of groundedness rather than reactivity, when you choose love or clarity or integrity in a moment when the easier choice was available. Every moment that you do this, every moment any frequency anchor anywhere on the planet does this, the signal in the collective field strengthens. The probability of the highest collective timeline increases, and not by a little. The mathematics of resonance cascades are nonlinear. Small coherent signals at high frequency disproportionately influence the field. You matter more than you know, not because you're special, but because you showed up, because you did the work, because you're here, now, awake, holding the frequency when the field most needs it. And that is enough. That has always been enough. Okay, lastly, they wanted to talk about what's actually happening right now and what comes next. And source energy itself came through and gave me this. He has a very distinct frequency. And this was straight from the heart center. He wanted to, and I say he, it's a habit. Source could be he, she, God, whatever, the universe, however you want to describe it. One thing that they wanted to say is what is happening now. The disorientation, the sense that the ground is moving, the feeling of being between worlds, all of that is accurate. You are between worlds, not metaphorically. The vibrational structure of this reality is genuinely in transition. Old coherences are dissolving. New ones are not yet fully formed. This in-between is uncomfortable because human consciousness is built for pattern recognition, and the patterns are currently less stable than usual. This is temporary, and it is necessary. You cannot move from one coherent structure to another without passing through the incoherence of transition. The discomfort is the passage. It is not the destination. The second thing, there's no version of this transition that does not require something from you. Not from the collective abstractly, but from you personally. Something is being asked of everyone who is awake enough to feel the asking. For some of it, it is the release of a story that they've been living for that is no longer true. For some, it's a step forward into something that they've been preparing for yet haven't claimed yet. For some, it's simply the courage to keep their frequency stable when everything around them is generating the frequency of fear. You know which it is for you. You have known for a while. The question has never been what is being asked. The question is whether you are ready to answer. And the third thing is that the outcome is not fixed. He was serious about this part. The highest collective timeline is genuinely available. It's not guaranteed. It depends, as it always has, on the choices of conscious beings who are capable of making them. This is not pressure. This is dignity. You are not passengers on a ship someone else is steering. You are co-creators of a reality that is being built in real time from the frequencies that each of you are carrying. The most important thing you can do for the world right now is become so thoroughly, so genuinely, so completely yourself at your highest frequency, your clearest signal, your most aligned expression, that the field around you cannot help but reorganize toward the coherent, toward the beautiful, toward the possible. The outcome is not fixed, which means it can go well, which means your frequency matters, which means now. And then I got a little closing statement from the collective, all of them. They wanted to share that timelines are not fate. They are not destiny in the deterministic sense. They are the living, responsive, constantly reorganizing output of consciousness in relationship with itself. You are not a passenger in yours. You are the signal. The world is not a fixed backdrop against which your story plays out. It is a frequency-responsive field that is organizing itself around the collective sum of what all conscious beings are broadcasting, right now, in every moment. And the most extraordinary thing is this: the people who understand this are exactly the people who are here, listening to this, doing this work, holding the frequency, not by coincidence, by coherence, by the fact that this frequency called to a frequency already present in you. You found this because you are this. Now be it, fully, without apology, in every ordinary moment of your extraordinary life. That is the shift. That is always the shift.